Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, as today we're playing as Judas. And of course, every time you're going to the Dark Room or the chest or Mega Satan or basically any objective which has Hush, speed is of the essence. And not only because you're trying to get to those objectives, but because also the run can take like 40 to 50 minutes, time penalty starts kicking in, so obviously you want to go through rooms as fast as humanly possible to actually maximize your score. There's also like another aspect if you're actually making videos, like if there's a very straightforward run but it's maybe 50 minutes long, that means I have to record a 10-minute commentary, and sometimes there's not much to talk about, so kind of have to talk maybe about other things or maybe expand some of the points, and that can be quite difficult, but of course I wouldn't consider that a problem most people face in their time. But in general, of course, it's better to go faster, because that means you're gonna just be better off, you're gonna get to those objectives, you're gonna get less time penalty, and all in all you're just gonna have a much more fun run, because you're gonna get those items faster, and you're not gonna feel like you're slogging behind. So getting that very first treasure room to actually give you a speed upgrade, I think is so crucial, and maybe I didn't really appreciate speed upgrades for the longest time, but now I'm basically just saying the more speed I have, the better. And at a certain point I remember I even wanted to be slower than my base speed, because I felt like I was more controlling my character, and obviously I would expect there to be some differences between the Flash version of Isaac and of course this version as well, and just how the movement works. But especially in Isaac, like especially when Afterbirth Plus came out, when I actually started getting into the dailies just a little bit more seriously, having a lot of speed is so great, because it allows you to dodge situations which you just wouldn't dodge before. And not only that, of course, it also allows you to kind of go through the rooms just a bit faster. And when you're trying to break the game, trying to go to the shops, trying to open up sacks, and of course things like that, all those things add time on top of what you already have. And when you consider that maybe some floors are just extra large, going faster than just the average is really gonna help you on that benefits. It's not gonna make a huge difference, but it can be the difference between you making boss rush or Hush in some situations. And I feel like whenever you can get a speed upgrade early on, it's usually a very good bargain, at least an indication that you're gonna have a good run on your hands. Obviously there are other ways to go faster, like just having a lot of damage or ways to clear the room, or maybe just even having Magneto in some sense, because Magneto is gonna bring those consumables closer to you, so you don't have to kind of go through the room and the floor to collect them. And you know, that's a very marginal increase in speed, but it's still an increase in speed, and I feel like this is something I'm just more aware of than what I was when I actually started playing the dailies. I feel like there are a few stances, or at least progressions, when you play the dailies. The first one is you try to reduce your damage penalty, like that's gonna be the biggest issue, obviously. The second one is you're gonna try to reduce your time penalty, because when that happens, of course, you try to get to boss rush and Hush, and when you get maybe to that point where you kind of reliably get to those objectives, then you start looking at ways to really kind of maximize your score in the most minute detail possible. You try to avoid backtracking, even if it's just one room, you know, that's 5 points, but if you backtrack maybe on every single floor, that can add up to something like 100 points in the end. And of course, that can end up being the difference between maybe like 1 or 2 ranks in the end, which is admittedly not a lot, but any way you can kind of maximize and get some points is usually gonna be a good deal. But this particular run, if you're just kind of looking at it as a whole on paper, it was super strong, like there's nothing to complain about. I would say this was the ideal Judas run, and you can say that we don't have many items here, but this is pretty much enough for me to feel comfortable going into boss rush, the Hush, and of course also getting to the end. Our tier delay is at 5, which is the soft cap, so there's really no way to improve here. Our damage is at 7.01, and of course we know that every time we get a damage upgrade, it's gonna be even more influential than the one before, because of how the damage formula works, but also because we're Judas, our just inherent damage multiplier is much higher. And when you get combine things like with the Spoon Bender, it's just gonna increase our DPS a little bit, because now suddenly the shots that would usually miss will now hit the enemy. And later on we got Dark Matter to increase our damage even further. And I think the most important, not the most important, but definitely something that's very opportunistic here is Sackhead, or Sackbo, I'm not sure what it's called. Sackhead? I think it's Sackhead. And that is, of course, when you open up Sack, there's quite a high chance of actually getting a card. And just having those opportunistic cards, like having the Devil card in Boss Rush, for example, is gonna give you like 3, if not even a little bit more damage on top of that, and it's gonna make the whole fight go just much easier. And of course, that's just gonna maybe give you like maybe picking up 2 items for the duration of that room. But if you kind of look at it in relative terms, that damage upgrade is actually going to be much more beneficial, because you're going to be using it in a room where you're not only killing 1 or 2 enemies, you're basically using it in a room where you're killing 16 bosses in total, if not even a little bit more than that. So having cards in those situations is essentially just as effective, if not even more effective, than just having a regular damage upgrade. Of course, having a damage upgrade just not in a temporary form would help us to kind of go through the other rooms much faster, and it would be much more consistent. And I feel like this was one of the decisions that ended up happening in one of those devil deals. And of course what we had was a Guppy Spo, I think, and the other one was Dark Matter, and there's always a choice here. So we could only take, of course, one of those two items, and taking Guppy Spo would be great because it will allow us to convert our red health into spirit hearts, and that can be actually quite good if we're playing as Judas, because that way you stay a little bit more healthy, but it also does allow you to go to boss rep rooms, of course, pick up more devil deals and things like that. So it just gives you more minute control of your health, but also it does give you that possibility of getting a Guppy later down the road. But obviously if you're just looking at the stat increase, Dark Matter in that situation is much better. Not only because you're gonna get that damage, just because you're Judas, it's already gonna be more influential, but because the DPS is gonna stick with you. One of the choices is essentially like banking for the future, you're kinda hoping to get another Guppy item, whereas Dark Matter is an increase now, which is maybe not as significant, but you know that it's gonna come in handy. And I think in some situations I would go for Guppy Spot because the dream is real, of course, but I think in this particular one, that didn't really warrant it. We didn't have a lot of damage upgrades. At 5 tier deal I felt like going for the obvious, or at least for the immediate damage upgrade is gonna be much better, and I feel like I made the right decision in the end, because with 7 damage, at least up until that point, we actually didn't get more damage upgrades, and if I didn't have that damage that I actually got, I don't think I would be able to get to boss rush and then get to the womb 2 in time. You can see me actually killing Mom's Heart at around like 29th minute and 30 seconds. And if I didn't pick up the damage upgrade at that point, I feel like I wouldn't be fast enough in order to make it there. And of course, even if I decided to go to the Devil Deal, there would be Krampus in there, and maybe I wouldn't get the Lump of Coal, which would maybe result in me just taking more damage later on in the run. And it's like a butterfly domino effect in some sense, where one of those decisions can actually end up influencing the rest of the run. And if you've played the run for yourself, you might say, well, you're complaining about not having enough damage, but when I played, it was actually very easy. And the biggest thing for that, the biggest part for that, is first of all, we have Judas' Shadow. I think you've noticed that. But the problem was, I didn't find a way to actually kill myself. And maybe part of that was because I didn't explore the rooms in full, which means just because I was trying to go fast, of course, I couldn't find a way to actually reliably kill myself. And killing myself later on just didn't seem like a good idea, even if there was a way, because I don't want to respawn with only 2 black hearts if I don't have a guarantee that I'll actually be able to respawn my health. And going to the harsh fight with only 2 black hearts seemed quite not only detrimental, but also very destructive, suicidal in some sense. So I decided to go against it and just figured I'm gonna kill him with just this, and if I happen to respawn, of course, maybe if Harsh kills me, it was unlikely, but you know, it could happen, at least I'll have a second chance as Dark Judas to actually get him and try to kill him that way. Luckily, the Dark Judas didn't trigger and was maybe more of a dead item, but I always say it's better to have a dead item than to use it and then die afterwards. That would just be unnecessary in some regard. And of course, I think the other reason why maybe this run isn't as strong as some people have said it is the second floor. And I found the telepills. I tried to use it in a position where I felt like there could be a secret room, like just trying to maximize my pill usage, and I used it. It was a telepills and it teleported me to the I am error room, and that might not seem that maybe surprising, but when you realize that, first of all, of course, everybody does get the same pill, everybody got the telepills, but not everybody went to the I am error room. A lot of people, I would say the majority of people, didn't go there, and what's maybe crazy about this is that is one of those effects that isn't seeded, and of course, every time you use the telepills, you might or might not go to the I am error room, and that is not the same experience that every single other player in the game will have. And because as a result of that, not only did I miss the Devil Deal on the second floor, but there was also a Magic Mush hiding somewhere, which I also missed, and of course having that would also increase our DPS in a very marginal manner. But that didn't happen, and I still had, I would say, a pretty relatively good run, and when I picked up Fruitcake, I was kind of confident I'm actually gonna be able to make it through. The biggest contributor of just overall power and just maybe how safe I felt is definitely Holy Mantle. With Holy Mantle, I feel like you can get through anything in most cases. And maybe another thing I would like to point out is Dark Matter. And of course, when you have Dark Matter, you also not only do you have increased damage, but also you have Fear Shot. And Fear Shot is, I would say, a double-edged sword, because it's helpful in some situations, but it can also be very detrimental in others. Like if enemies jump around a lot, you can maybe fear them and they jump in unpredictable scenarios. But also sometimes when enemies are charging at you and you fear them, they just stop, and that's also like a good thing. So maybe that's another thing to consider when you actually want to pick up Dark Matter, because it can have a negative effect on you. And I know a lot of people don't like it for that fact, and for the longest time I actually didn't want to pick it up because I didn't realize it has an associated damage upgrade with it, and when I realized it does, obviously it's a no-brainer, but still the fear effect can be quite dangerous if you're maybe not sure what you're doing. And picking up Fruitcake later on just kind of maybe a little bit more secure, because not only do you get that random fair shot sometimes, but also get basically every other shot as well, and that allows you to maybe freeze enemies in place, slow them, poison them, and just maybe increases your DPS a little bit, so fair isn't that big of a problem. So when it got here, we beat the lamp, we picked up the trophy, and we finished the run at the 74th place. Not too good, but like I said, I did miss a very obvious item, which a lot of people found, due to maybe no fault of my own. Like, there's really no way for me to know that could be a telepills and I would get teleported to the ERROOOR room. Ideally, of course, you would save the pills for the end of the floor and then use them, but the chances of actually getting to the ERROOOR room are so low, because first of all, that has to be a telepills, and second of all, that like 6% chance has to activate for you to actually get there. So I don't think it's worth worrying about. We did get to the end, it was still a very strong run. Our damage penalty wasn't all that high. Obviously, it could have been even lower because we had the Holy Mantle, but it is what it is. I can't complain too much. I enjoyed the run, I did all the main objectives. I think I played well to some extent, but in the end, I just felt like with the fruitcake and all of those combinations, we also had quite a nice synergy going on, so it was also good in that aspect. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.